Welcome to TonightTales audio. Sit back, relax, and let the story begin. The photograph had been taken in 1902. She knew because the year was written on the back in faded ink, together with the name of the hotel. She had looked at the photograph many times before deciding to frame it. It wasn't particularly large. The edges were worn, one corner slightly bent, and time had softened the contrast until some of the details almost disappeared into shades of gray. But her grandmother was there. A child in 1902. That alone made the photograph special. She had known her grandmother as an old woman. She remembered her voice, her expressions, the way certain stories could return again and again as though they had happened only yesterday. Seeing her as a child was different. The family had been arranged outside a hotel for the photograph. Adults stood behind the younger children, everyone facing the camera with the serious expressions common in old photographs. Her grandmother stood among them, small, still, looking directly ahead. She smiled whenever she looked at her. It was strange to think that the child in the photograph had no idea what her life would become. No idea that one day, more than a century later, her granddaughter would be standing in a shop choosing a frame for that very photograph. She chose a simple one. Nothing decorative. At home, she placed it on a shelf in the living room. For the first few days, she looked at it often. Then gradually, it became part of the room. She still noticed it, but not in the same way. Until one evening, she had picked up the frame without really thinking about it. There was a little dust along the top, and she wiped it away with her thumb before looking at the photograph again. Her grandmother immediately caught her attention. Then her eyes moved beyond the family. The photograph had captured more than the people posing for it. The hotel entrance was visible behind them, along with several members of staff. Most were standing farther back or had been caught in the middle of whatever they were doing. One woman stood apart from the others. She wasn't posing. She seemed to be working when something had made her turn toward the camera. She was looking directly into it. She brought the photograph closer. There was something familiar about the woman's face. She studied it for a moment. The photograph wasn't clear enough to see every detail, especially at that distance. Still, she looked surprisingly familiar, almost like... She smiled and shook her head. Like me. It was an odd resemblance. Nothing more. People looked alike sometimes, even when they had no connection to each other. And this woman had been photographed in 1902. She placed the frame back on the shelf. Within minutes, her attention had moved elsewhere. The following week, she visited a flea market. She hadn't gone looking for anything in particular. That was part of what she liked about places like this. Tables were covered with things that had once belonged to someone else. Books with names written inside their covers, old kitchenware, jewelry, paintings, boxes filled with objects that seemed to have lost their purpose somewhere along the way. She moved from table to table without buying anything. Then she noticed a small box. It was made of dark wood and showed its age. The surface was scratched, and the small metal clasp had lost most of its shine. She opened it. Inside was a pocket watch. She lifted it carefully. It had some weight to it. The metal was worn, but the glass covering the face was intact. The hands were still. She turned it over. Nothing about it seemed particularly valuable. But she liked it. There wasn't really a reason. Sometimes that was enough. She bought it. It wasn't until she was home that she discovered the paper. She had taken the pocket watch from its box and was examining it more closely when she noticed that the lining beneath it wasn't sitting properly. She pressed against one edge. It moved. She lifted it. A folded piece of paper had been hidden underneath. She frowned. "What's this?" She unfolded it. The paper looked as old as the box, but the text had been printed rather than written by hand. At first, she assumed it would be information about the watch. In a way, it was. She began to read. Instructions for the traveler. She stopped, then read the heading again. A small smile appeared. Traveler? She continued. Fully winding the watch activates the mechanism. Upon activation, the bearer will be transported to an unknown time and place selected by the watch. She stared at the sentence, then laughed. Okay. Someone had a sense of humor. She kept reading. The destination cannot be selected or influenced by the bearer. The watch will continue to run for 48 hours. When the mechanism stops, the bearer will return to the time and place from which the journey began. Her smile faded slightly as she reached the final lines. The watch must remain in the bearer's possession for the duration of the journey. If the watch is lost, the bearer will remain. She read the last sentence twice. Not because she believed it. It was simply oddly specific. She turned the paper over. Nothing. At the bottom of the instructions was a small manufacturer's mark. So whoever had made the watch, or at least whoever had made the instructions, had gone to considerable effort. She looked at the pocket watch, then at the crown. All she had to do, according to the paper, was wind it completely. She almost tried. Almost. Then she laughed again. No. She folded the instructions and placed them back inside the box. The pocket watch followed. She carried the box into the living room and placed it on the bookshelf, leaving the lid open. It looked good there. An old pocket watch in an old wooden box, and a ridiculous set of instructions hidden underneath. She went on with her evening. The next morning, the watch was still there. Of course it was. She passed it on her way to the kitchen, passed it again later. By afternoon, she barely thought about it. She had other things to do. And later that day, she was meeting her best friend. They had known each other long enough that their conversations rarely stayed on one subject. One thing led to another. Something funny became something serious became an old memory became a completely different conversation. Eventually, they began talking about family. She mentioned the photograph. The one from 1902, her friend asked. Yeah, I framed it. With your grandmother? She nodded. She was so young. They talked about it for a while, about how strange old photographs could feel, about seeing people before they became the people you knew. And eventually she mentioned her grandmother's sister. Her friend knew the stories. She had heard enough of them over the years. Her grandmother had spoken about her sister often, and those stories had been passed on so many times that the woman had become strangely familiar despite being someone she had never met. She had died before she was born. I've always thought it was a shame, she said. What? That I never got to meet her. Her friend nodded. I know. I've heard so much about her. Sometimes it feels like I should remember her. But you weren't born yet. I know. She smiled. That's the annoying part. Her friend laughed. She looked down at her drink for a moment. If I could meet one person from the family that I never got the chance to meet, it would probably be her. Her friend leaned back. Maybe you just need a time machine. She laughed. Yeah, that would make things easier. Her friend had already moved on. The comment meant nothing to her. Just a joke. A natural answer to an impossible wish? The conversation continued. But for her, something had changed. Not much. Just enough for an image to appear in her mind. A wooden box, sitting open on her bookshelf. And inside it, an old pocket watch. It was evening when she returned home. She closed the door behind her and put down her things. For a moment, she stood in the hallway. Then she looked toward the living room. The watch was exactly where she had left it. She walked over. The box stood open. Beside it was the framed photograph from 1902. She looked at the watch. Maybe you just need a time machine. She smiled. It was stupid. The instructions were a joke. They had to be. She picked up the watch anyway. It felt cool and heavy in her hand. She remembered the words on the paper. An unknown time, an unknown place. 48 hours. She could end up in the past. If such a thing were possible. She looked at the photograph. Her grandmother as a child, her family, the hotel. Somewhere in that past had also lived the sister she had heard about all her life but never met. For just a moment, she imagined it. Actually meeting her. Hearing her voice instead of hearing stories about it. Seeing for herself what she had been like. Then another thought pushed its way in. The instructions didn't say the past. They said an unknown time. She could just as easily go forward. She looked down at the crown of the watch. Her fingers moved toward it, then stopped. She placed the watch back in the box. Not yet. But when she walked away this time, she glanced back. The watch no longer felt quite as much like a joke. The pocket watch remained on the shelf the next morning. She noticed it almost immediately, not because anything had changed. Nothing had. The wooden box was still open. The watch rested inside exactly where she had left it, and beside it stood the photograph from 1902. She made coffee, ate breakfast, tried not to look at either of them. It didn't work. Every time she passed through the living room, her eyes moved toward the shelf. The instructions were ridiculous. She knew that. A pocket watch couldn't send someone through time. Someone had created an elaborate story around an old object, perhaps as a joke or as part of some game that had long since been forgotten. There was one very easy way to prove it. Win the watch, nothing would happen. The watch would begin ticking, assuming it still worked, and that would be the end of it. Yet she didn't touch it, not until later. She stood in front of the bookshelf and looked at the open box. Her friend's words from the previous day returned to her. Maybe you just need a time machine. She reached for the watch. It was absurd how nervous she felt. She lifted it from the box and turned it over in her hand. Then she removed the folded instructions from beneath the lining and read them again. An unknown time, an unknown place, 48 hours, and the final warning. If the watch is lost, the bearer will remain. She lowered the paper. If this is a joke, it's a very good one. She looked around her living room. Everything was exactly as it should be. Her furniture, her books, the framed photograph, her phone lying on the table. Normal, safe, present. She could put the watch back. For several seconds, she almost did. Then she thought of her grandmother's sister, a woman she knew only through stories. She knew the watch wouldn't necessarily take her there. Even according to the ridiculous instructions, she couldn't choose. It might take her into the past, it might take her into the future, or, far more likely, it would take her nowhere at all. She folded the instructions and placed them on the table. Then she closed her fingers around the watch. Okay. She took a breath. Let's prove this doesn't work. Her fingers found the crown. She began to wind it. Once, twice. The mechanism resisted slightly more with every turn. She continued. Then it stopped, fully wound. For a second, nothing happened. She stared at the watch. A smile began to form. Of course. Tick. She froze. The sound was impossibly loud. Tick. She looked around. Tick. The sound seemed to come from everywhere now, each movement of the mechanism deeper and louder than the one before it. Tick. The room changed, not disappeared. Changed. The walls seemed farther away. She reached for the table, but her fingers never touched it. A strange, transparent surface surrounded her. A bubble. That was the only word her mind could find for it. She could still see the living room beyond it. Then the floor dropped away. She gasped. The room vanished beneath her. The building, the street, the city. Everything fell away with impossible speed. She wanted to scream, but there was no sensation of falling. She was moving upward, higher, faster, until the world itself was beneath her. Earth. She stared. For one impossible moment, she forgot to be afraid. The planet filled her vision. Blue, white, alive. Then the watch ticked again. Tick. Something began to change. At first, she couldn't understand what she was seeing. Then she noticed the lights. They were disappearing. Cities changed beneath her. Roads faded. The patterns created by modern civilization began shrinking and vanishing as though someone were slowly undoing them. She pressed both hands against the invisible surface around her. No. Tick. Time was moving backwards. She didn't know how she knew. She simply did. The world below her was becoming older. Or younger. She wasn't sure which word made more sense. Tick. Then she began moving again. Down. The planet rushed toward her. Clouds surrounded the bubble. For a moment, there was nothing but white. Then rooftops appeared below. Streets, buildings, a city. She barely had time to see them. The bubble vanished. Her feet touched solid ground, and the deafening ticking stopped. She stumbled forward. For several seconds, she could do nothing but breathe. The pocket watch was still in her hand. Tick, tick, tick. Quiet now. Normal? She stared at it. No. She looked around. No, no, no. The street was real. The buildings were real. People were moving in the distance. She turned in a slow circle. Her living room was gone. Her house was gone. Everything she knew was gone. The instructions hadn't been a joke. The watch had worked. She tightened her grip around it. 48 hours. The thought arrived immediately. She had 48 hours. Then she would go home, as long as she didn't lose the watch. She slipped it carefully into the deepest pocket she had. Okay. Her voice sounded strangely small. Where am I? Excuse me? She spun around. A man stood a few steps away. She hadn't heard him approach. He was dressed unlike anyone she would normally pass on the street. His clothes were formal, his coat carefully buttoned, a hat casting a slight shadow across his face. In one hand, he carried a bag. As he reached her, he held it out. She looked at the bag, then at him. Before she could say anything, he placed it in her hands. "You'll need this." She blinked, caught off guard. "For what?" But the man was already walking past her. "Wait!" She turned after him. She hesitated before taking it. The bag was heavier than expected. "Wait, who are—" But the man had already walked past her. She looked down at the bag. Inside was a bottle of water, food, money she didn't recognize, and clothing. She stared. The clothes were nothing like what she was wearing. Her stomach tightened. She turned. "Excuse me." The man was gone. She blinked. There hadn't been enough time. She hurried several steps in the direction he had walked. Nothing. People were moving farther along the street, but she couldn't see him anywhere. She looked behind her. Nothing there either. "Where did you go?" No answer. She looked down at the bag again. Water, food, money, clothes. Someone had known she would need them. Someone had known she would be here. The thought was almost worse than the time travel. She stood still for several moments before forcing herself to move. There would be time to think about the man later. Right now, she needed to understand where she was. She started walking, and with every step, the differences became harder to ignore. The streets, the buildings, the clothes people wore, the sounds, even the pace of everything felt different. There were no smartphones in anyone's hands, no modern signs, no familiar cars passing her. People had begun looking at her, not openly, but enough. She looked down at herself. Of course, her clothes. She stopped. The bag. The man had given her clothes. She needed somewhere private. It took some searching, but eventually she found a place where she could change without attracting attention. She opened the bag again. The clothes were simple, nothing elaborate. But when she put them on and looked down at herself, she understood immediately why they had been included. She looked like she belonged here, or at least she looked less like she didn't. She folded her own clothes and pushed them into the bag. The pocket watch remained with her. She checked it twice before leaving. Still there, still ticking. When she returned to the street, fewer people looked at her. That helped. A little. But she still had no idea where or when she was. Then she heard a voice farther down the street. A boy was calling out to passing pedestrians, newspapers tucked beneath one arm. She watched someone stop, hand him a coin, and take a paper. Her eyes dropped to the unfamiliar money in her bag. "Right?" She approached him. "One, please." The boy held out his hand. She looked at the coins, then at him. He looked back. She chose one. His expression told her immediately that it was wrong. "Sorry." She tried another. The boy took it, handed her the newspaper, and moved on to the next customer. She stepped aside. For a moment, she was afraid to look. Then she unfolded the paper. Her eyes moved across the front page and stopped at the date. August 17th, 1902. She stared. 1902. Her heart began beating faster. She read it again. August 17th, 1902. No way. Her thoughts went immediately to the photograph in her living room. She knew the date written on the back. She had looked at it enough times. August 18th, 1902. Tomorrow. The photograph of her grandmother and her family would be taken tomorrow. She lowered the newspaper slowly. Was she in the same city? She looked around again, this time searching for something familiar. But a single old photograph didn't give her enough to recognize an entire city. She had seen the hotel, the entrance, part of the street. Nothing more. She looked back at the newspaper. Maybe the name of the city was there. She found it. Her stomach tightened again. It could be. She wasn't completely certain, but the name felt familiar. Had she seen it written on the back of the photograph? She tried to remember. She needed somewhere quiet, somewhere to sit, and more importantly, somewhere to sleep. Whatever happened next, she was going to spend at least one night here. She began looking through the newspaper, advertisements, shops, services, notices. Then her eyes stopped. A hotel advertisement. She read the name. Once, then again. She knew that name. She had read it before. On the back of a photograph. She could see the picture in her mind. Her grandmother as a child. Her family gathered outside, the entrance behind them, the hotel. This hotel! She looked at the date at the top of the newspaper again. August 17th, 1902. The photograph would be taken tomorrow. She slowly lowered the paper. Of every time the watch could have chosen. Of every place. It had brought her here. She thought of the conversation with her friend, of the woman she'd wished she could meet. Then she looked down at the pocket watch hidden safely beneath her clothes. For the first time, she wondered if the destination had ever been random at all. Thank you for spending your time with TonightTales Audio. If this story made you smile, think, dream, or simply helped you relax, let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you'd like more stories like this. Every comment, every like, and every listener means more than you know. Until our paths cross again in another story, thank you for listening.